Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And today I'm joined by Henri Nyakarundi. He's a social entrepreneur. He started Ared Group, a social enterprise that we'll talk about it in a second. But we really appreciate your time, and we hope you're gonna learn a lot from this interview. So without further ado, let me give welcome Henry and have him tell us a little bit about himself and the venture that he's been working on recently. Hi, Henry.
Thanks for how you doing, Fahad? Thanks for the opportunity. First of all, briefly, my story is I grew up in Burundi. I moved to the States in '96. I came back in Africa, in East Africa, in 2013, and I've been in business for 20 years. Done some stuff in the States, done some stuff in Burundi. And well, now with ARED, we're in 4 countries and spreading. And basically, what ARED is, we're a technology company for social good. So, and we deal with B2B type of technology structure. So we developed a solution to bridge the gap of access to digital services and digital application for low-income people using 2 products we developed, which is a solar kiosk platform, but also a high capacity mini server that allow us to localize digital application and distribute it via Wi-Fi. The overall business is, yeah, I mean, it's a franchise on the user standpoint, but for us, we provide the technology to NGOs and telecom companies that also going to build their own agent network. We call it micro franchise, but in Africa, it's called agent network. You know, telecos,
Yeah.
banks have agents on the street to provide their services. But the way it works is very simple. What we realized when I came back was that internet is very expensive. Number one,
Yeah.
for 70% of the population. I mean, most people cannot afford to buy constant internet, and then things varies per country, but let's use Rwanda as an example. Yes, internet cost has been going down in Rwanda dramatically, but it's still expensive for a majority of people. And then most people that have smartphone also don't have high end smartphone like you and I do that has high processing power, decent internal memory. So the problematic become where if you don't have access to internet, and if you don't have a high capacity smartphone, how can you access digital application? How can you download a mobile app or view a video without those key features? So we decided to build a localized network within a mini server. So we install those mini server in a high traffic area. And those mini server are built in within a kiosk, a solar kiosk, because everything is solar power. And on top of that, the kiosks provide additional services because we also have a energy problem in Africa, including Rwanda, where people in rural areas, semi-urban area, refugee camps, because we operate in refugee camps, have a huge problem charging their phone because they don't have electricity at home or they're outside a lot and they need to charge those phone on a daily basis or consistent basis. So we looking at all that problem, that's why this idea of a one-stop shop platform came about. And we hire women and people with disability to operate those kiosks where they can generate money from those kiosks. So that's why we call it a triple bottom impact. There's the economic impact with the job creation, there's an environmental impact with the solar aspect, and there's a technology impact with access to services and content.
Awesome. Wow. So how long have you been doing this business? When did you start?
Yeah, so the idea came about in 2009, but I started the business in 2013 in Rwanda, and it took me 3 years to build the first prototype. Now, I just have to clarify something. Initially, the business was just about phone charging. All this digital aspect of the business came with time. Like any business, we pivoted, we learned, we changed a few things, and but it initially was a phone charging kiosk. It took 3 years to develop, and when we finished building the first prototype was built in Poland, and I moved. I moved back. Initially, I was going to move to Burundi actually because I grew up there. I knew the ecosystem a little bit better, but with the political situation, I decided to just move to Rwanda, and that's how I started. 2013, actually February 2013. That's when I registered a business.
Wow, awesome. So, talk to us about the challenges that you faced while bootstrapping this venture and how you overcame them.
Yeah, I mean, there's many challenges. Africa is a very fragmented market. Now, I can only speak for myself because
Yeah,
I built this company to scale, so to go to other countries, and we did scale in 4 countries now. So you learn a lot, right? First of all, what I learned is I had to change my mindset. Coming from abroad, doing business in the States is totally different than doing business in Africa. Africa is a very fragmented market. Every country has their own challenges, has their own policies, their own laws, their own structure. So you have to have a very dynamic business model. Another challenge also is taxes. We have high taxes across Africa. The other challenge we have is we are a hardware and software company. Well, at that time, now it's changing a little bit, but it's still not there yet. But when I started ARED, there was no companies that could develop this technology locally. And when I say locally, I mean on the continent. We had to go to Asia, Germany and Asia, to finally find the right partner, not only to design the product, but also to produce it at a very competitive cost. Because believe it or not, even though labor is cheap in Africa, our tax structure does not enable manufacturing. I'll give you a perfect example. We're trying to do assembly of the kiosk a few years back. If I bring this product fully finished, fully assembled from Asia, I pay no tax. Well, I pay because it's a solar product. It's considered a solar product. If I want to do the assembly locally, there's over 185 components to this kiosk. I have to pay taxes on most of those components.
yeah,
So it comes out much, much more expensive for me to assemble it overseas. So we have policies issues. We have policies that benefit import instead of making stuff locally, and they
yeah,
make it very difficult.
yeah,
And then the last challenge is expansion, man. Expanding in other countries is extremely challenging. So you have to have a very innovative business model if you want to, implement yourself in other countries.
yeah. Wow. So, speaking of expansion, recently I was watching one of your vlogs on YouTube, and you were visiting Nigeria. Have you set up there yet?
Yeah, so we are in Nigeria. When you say setup, so now our model is through partnership. We license our technology to local partners, and the partner is in charge of implementing the solution, and we do a revenue sharing structure. But yes, we currently looking for more partner. But Nigeria is definitely to me, as far as as far as I know, uh, it's the best market to be in Africa for sure.
Yeah,
It's a very dynamic market. Nigerians are very business oriented, very entrepreneurial. I love that ecosystem. I mean, of
yeah.
course, it has its challenge, but overall, I love that ecosystem.
Great. So, one of the things I wanted to touch on is funding. So, how do you go about getting funding for your venture in Africa? A lot of people have ideas, but access to capital is like one of the major problems that they face. How did you go about raising capital, and what advice would you give people who were planning on starting their ventures and raising capital?
Well, I mean, I started. the capital raising started with competition and grants. That's how I targeted capital. Initially, I built this business with my own money for the first year. The first development and all was paid through, the sale of my previous business. But what I prefer doing is sharing what not to do, or
Okay,
the things you need to
fair
do
enough.
to raise money. Because if you look at, it's a game. Raising capital, it's a game. It's a strategy game. And if you don't understand the strategy game, you're going to fail. And you're going to fail in a lot of ways. Um, Raising capital is about networking. When I'm talking about VCs, angel investors, and all. Um, Now, unfortunately, in Africa, we still don't have a funding ecosystem developed the way the States is. I don't know about Europe, but the States have a lot of ways to raise capital. But in Africa, most capital raising, especially for tech companies, VCs. You have grant potential if you have a social impact formula within your company, but usually it's VCs, angel investors, and that's a game of networking. Unfortunately, there's not enough capital available for the amount of businesses out there. But if you look at the companies doing business in Africa that raise the most money, they have very specific criteria and structure that you people need to pay attention to. Number one, most of them have a structure, a group structure outside Africa, whether it's in Europe or in America, or somewhere that investors feel comfortable putting money in. One of the things I learned about investors is they don't trust Africa in general, and they don't trust African entrepreneurs in general. I'm not trying to make it's 100% the case, but it's been the majority of the case.
What do you think
So
that is? Not to cut you off, but what do you think that is? They don't trust African entrepreneurs in Africa.
I mean, I've pitched to investors in Europe, man, in Amsterdam. Most of them never even been to Africa, so they base their African expertise on TV, the news, and we all know how that narrative is
Yeah,
negative and not positive, because we don't even control that narrative. I remember pitching to a group of investors and telling them the problem of charging, and they couldn't believe this. They said, "What? Well, we don't have. You guys don't have electricity? Like, it's like, and it's not their fault. They're ignorant. They don't know about the situation. They never travel. And I always tell investors never travel. Please spend some time. And then you have other investors that think Africa is just a jungle and all that. But that's besides the point. I mean, you see a growth in
yeah,
investment, but it's still not enough for the need on the ground. I mean, the whole continent last year, they say we raised the whole continent, the tech space raised $1 billion. $1 billion. That's what a medium-sized company do in the States. I mean, and we're talking about a whole continent, doing that. So, and I'm shocked every time people feel excited about that number. It's nothing, man.
yeah.
But those are the things. So you have to be very strategic on your fundraising. The other thing I would say is you need to find a fund manager, somebody who's well connected. If you don't have the connection, find a fund manager and work out a success fee with that fund manager that can help you raise capital. Because as I said, raising capital is about who you know. It's about having the network, tapping into the network. Because you have to think a VC gets hundreds, some of them gets thousands of applications on a weekly or monthly basis. They don't go through all that. But if you go through the door where you're introduced by somebody they know, that already that's a 50% win already, because you were introduced by somebody they trust, so they're going to value and pay attention and listen to what you have to say. So that's the way the game is. But I'm very optimistic of the future, because now I'm seeing like a platform like crowd investing. I think that's going to be the game changer. I don't think VC is the way to go anymore. I think we need to incorporate technology to democratize access to funding.
Awesome. So so who do you see making those kind of investments in Africa? Are they like Africans that are like are those investors that are local? Are they those in the diaspora? Like who do you see making those kind of investments in African startups?
Man, I don't. Again, we have zero
who's
effort.
making that 1
We
billion
we have,
investment?
well, for us, we have zero African investors. Unfortunately, I tried. It just our business did not just it did not appeal to them, which is fine. But it just again we don't value technology yet like the West does, or the Asia. Also, Asia is way ahead. We still, you know, most of the African entrepreneur I spoke to, and I'm sure it's changing also because I've been back for 7 years now, so I see the conversation changing slowly. But in the early days, I remember one telling me straight up, say, Henry, come back with a project of building a hotel or an apartment and all, then I'll get you funding. All right. But this thing of social, helping the poor and all those things, there's no money. I mean, straight up, that's what the guy told me.
Yeah,
So you have to understand we still have that mentality of physical business, digital and all is still far fetched for a lot of investors. Now you see some angel investors trying to make moves, but it's still very, very little compared to what it's needed, and what's required. Um, so to me, and unfortunately, that's the reality. I only target international investors that understand this type of business we're in, but most importantly, that willing to look at the long term.
yeah,
They're long term investors because
yeah,
technology is a long term game. I don't care what people say, and that's the problem also with local investors. They want their money back in 6 months to a year. In technology, that's not going to happen. If you're
yeah,
not invested for 5 to 10 years, don't get into tech. It's just that simple.
yeah, yeah. So speaking of investments, so we are in tech industry. Are there other industries that you see, um, booming, or that really need problem solvers to come in and take advantage of, uh, those opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most important, the biggest opportunity right now in Africa is in agri-tech. And agri-tech is a very broad spectrum, but there's a lot of technology now with this global warming happening, a lot of desertification of the lands, and all this problem with waters and rain and seasons changing all the time. There's a lot of technology now where you can grow food with 90% less water. You can manage the whole ecosystem digitally. Um, you can convert um, uh, bio to briquettes uh, instead of using charcoal. There's so much opportunity in agriculture. It's ridiculous, and it's now that I see a lot more funding in there, but unfortunately, I don't see a lot of startup getting into that. Right now, what's hot is fintech. And fintech is kind of overrated. There's so many companies in fintech right now in Africa. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
But agri-tech is, to me, where the gold nugget will is and will be and will keep growing as this global warming is going to get worse and worse.
perfect. So there's a lot of people. There are a lot of people in the diaspora, right, who want to come home, help build the continent, but they don't have enough information, and they also, um, kind of sit between, investing there while they're still abroad, and they're afraid of taking a leap of faith and move back. Like, what I want you to tell people, about your story of moving back to the motherland, and also talk about how they should prepare to do that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're gonna if you want to do a business in Africa, yeah, you have to come home. Yeah, this idea of doing business while you're overseas is BS, man. I mean,
Yeah,
and it's not just about trust. A business is just like a child. You gotta be day to day and grow that child until that child is strong enough, to stand on their own and then start running. But in the beginning, you have to be there. So it depends what you're looking for, man. If you want to do a business on the continent, you have to be on the continent, and you have to be there 24 hours. And then when you build that team and all, then you can start traveling a little bit more. If you want to do investment, there's a lot of opportunity to invest. Unfortunately, yeah, trust issue also come in, but a lot of the trust issue also we have is also emphasized by the media, man. I think there's a lot of negativity around us African. We have created this narrative that we shouldn't trust each other. And because you hear all those horror stories, and I've heard some. The most the funniest horror story I always hear is when you send money to your uncle or your brother to build your house, and when you come home, it's not a house but a hut. So it's
Yeah.
one of those crazy things. But there's bad apples everywhere, right? The mistake people do is they don't put agreement in place when they work into a transactions. They do business on a handshake. Now you have a lot of legal structure now. I mean, Rwanda has one of the best legal structure when it comes to in Africa, and you can complain when somebody violate and steal your money. Financial crime is you go to jail here, man. So yeah. So it's just a matter of doing your homework. Because when you invest on a company, you actually invest on the owner. So you have to know the owner, do your due diligence. But just like anything else, there's a risk, and you have to accept the risk. So it depends what you're looking for.
Great. So let's say, so what propelled you to go back? So you went to school in the United States, did computer science. Did you work, or did you pack your bags and go right after school?
Well, I spent 17 years in the States, so I mean, I did business. I started my first business so I went there in '96. My first business in '98. I was a sales rep. I done a lot of business. I mean, I failed the first 10 years of there being in business. And yes, I worked. I worked at Staples, Kinko's. I had small jobs left and right, but business was always in my blood. I just never understood the concept of working for somebody. I just didn't. In my brain, it just didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I was successful from the beginning. It's just that I had to learn. I didn't know how different, and that's why I really blame the educational system back then. Now it's changing, but the school, university train you to get a job, to be an employee. To be an employer, you have to have a different mindset. You have to reprogram yourself. But what pushed me to come back? I got tired of the States, man. There was nothing. I accomplished. My last business was successful. I didn't like the lifestyle. I didn't like the fact that all you do is work, 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 work. There's no quality time. I didn't like the fact that I couldn't hang with my friends, and I was away from my family. I kind of started missing my parents. Um, and and lastly, I felt like I could do much, much more in Africa than and in the States. Better, good, and do something. And that's what ARED idea was about, combining, trying to solve one of the biggest problems that I felt at that time that needed to be solved. And doing that in the States, what are you trying to solve? And the problem out there a little bit different than Africa. So it was time for me to come home. Um, I left Africa dreaming about America, and then I left America dreaming about Africa. It's just that simple.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So yeah, there are a lot of people in the diaspora who go to school here, get jobs, get good paying jobs, and they're like, oh, why would I go back to Africa? I'm getting paid well. Have a family or have a good life here. Why would I, you know, trade this for Africa? And they're afraid of going back home. Like, why would somebody that has, let's say, they have these dreams of the kind of problems they would solve on the African continent, but also they have a good life in the US and they're getting paid well. And like they plan to go back home how do they go about preparing that journey of like transitioning, and what are the things they should be aware of?
Listen, going back home is not for everybody. My sister's still in the States. You know, she's not moving back. She got a great job. You know, she's not going to get that kind of salary here.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody. I mean, as long as you can come on vacation and everything, you know, you have it's a personal decision you have to make. You shouldn't follow trend, because that's also a mistake people do. They follow trend. Yeah, there's a lot of diaspora that are coming back to Africa, but there's a lot of them that are failing, and there's quite a few that are also going back. Nobody's talking about that, you know, because Africa ecosystem is a tough one also. So
Yes.
you have to make a decision based on what you want to do. You know, it took me, so from the time I made the decision to come home and the time I actually came back home, there was a 3 year gap. So in 2008, that was the first, no, the second time. So the first time I visited Rwanda was in 96. The second time was in 2008. And I saw the changes. The RDB had just started opening up and all those things. So in 2008, beginning 2009, I was like, you know what? I remember talking to my parents, my mom. I was like, you know what? It's time for me to come back home. And then now you have to plan your to come back. Don't just come back like this. You have to have at least saving for at least a year and year and a half. You know, don't come empty-handed. No, especially if you're going to do business. Number two, if you're diaspora, you should at least, in the meantime, while you're trying to figure out what you want to do and all, build yourself a small home or a house, so you don't have to worry about rent and all this nonsense, right? That would be beneficial if you can, of course. And number three, you need to plan. You need to know what you're coming home for. Are you coming home to look for a job? Are you coming home to start a business? If you're coming home to start a business, in what sector? You need to do your research. Please do your research, you know, and then, and then give yourself enough time to plan all these things and then take the jump. But it's harder as you get older. I was not married then, but I had a daughter who was, well, I mean, she's 18 now, but I had a daughter, so I didn't want to leave when she was very young. But it's harder the more established you are in another country, the longer your roots build, the harder it is to leave, especially if you have a family, if you have kids over there, that makes it even harder. But you need to know why you're coming back home for. You need to ask yourself some key question that's going to help you make a better decision.
Very powerful advice. Very powerful. Thank you, Henry. I guess,
No problem.
yeah. So, would you say that Africa has a lot of problems, right? And you hear all these heads of states talking about the role of diaspora in developing Africa, right? How they need the diaspora to come and contribute, right? So do you
Yeah,
see any
yeah.
programs that actually help those people in diaspora to come home and invest, and help building the countries?
So can you repeat the question? I didn't get the question.
So are there any government programs that help people who want to return home and
Oh yeah, yeah.
kind of invest? Are there any advantages that they give them, incentives, anything like that?
Oh yeah, Rwanda. I don't know any African countries that don't have programs for diaspora. I know Rwanda, for example, they I had a car and all. You can bring one vehicle tax free back then. I don't know if it's still on, but they didn't tax you for bringing all your stuff, TVs and all that. If you're moving back, they really. I know Ghana has programs. I know Nigeria has programs. Congo. I was in Kinshasa last year, and they were talking about how even now that you can come home without needing a visa, because a lot of them no longer had their passport and all. So if you can prove that you Congolese, or your parents were Congolese, then you can come home, get your passport. You don't no longer need a visa. I mean, any country, any government or any African country that is smart enough will have a program for diaspora. But more than just money, I think diaspora bring a new mindset of certain things. We've adopted certain behavior from the West that could be not all of it, but could be useful. Some of it could be useful. For example, I'll tell you what I like about America is on the business side is how it's not a nonsense country. It's about boom, what you need, what you have. Let's do a deal or not. Let's move forward. In business in Africa is much slower. They need to know you. They need to cater to you. So this is the type of mindset that diaspora also can bring. Also the network. A lot of diaspora have huge network from the States that can bring value. But yeah, man, I mean, there's a lot of program. I don't know if they're still active or not. I'm speaking for Rwanda though. But Rwanda was one of the best program I hear because the president was talking a lot about diaspora, and you can see a lot of quite a few people that work in government also come from diaspora because they bring you fresh idea, a new perspective of things, and all those things. So there's benefit of diaspora coming back home.
Thank you. So you also you mentor young entrepreneurs in Rwanda. Like, what do you see? Like, what drives them? Like, what do you see drives those young entrepreneurs? What problems do you see? What mindsets do you see that kind of block them from getting to where they want to be? Can you kind of share your experience with that?
Like in young men, especially young men, less women because women are more down to earth. My experience, but young men, it's just the dream of making a lot of money. Just living the life, man, and it's just, and we all go through it. I went through it, but what I like about this new generation is I do mentorship in not just in Rwanda, but one of the things I see that is very unique and similar to the youth in all those countries. They they understand, not all of them, but a lot more now than my generation. They understand that there is opportunities in Africa. There's an opportunity now to, instead of trying to get out of here, there's opportunity to try to solve our own problem and and build a successful business on it. So there is this hunger now to acquire knowledge. And I think internet really changed the game because you no longer have to go overseas now to acquire specific knowledge. Now internet give you all the knowledge you need. Um but and then unfortunately, and I'm saying this because it's something that really bothers me a lot, is that they don't get the support they should they need. I mean, I meet so many. There was a young group of our engineers, 9 of them. They developed an electrical car here in Rwanda, but
Mm.
they couldn't bring that idea into production because that requires a lot of money. And I'm going to speak on an African level. Our African government are still not putting. There's a lot of talk about supporting the youth, but it's just talk right now. There is no money behind all this, real money. There's no real structure behind this. There's no real support behind this. Now, each country different from others for sure, but overall, we're not there yet, man. If you compare countries, look at countries like Israel. They have unicorn level companies out there. Yeah, and it's a country as big as Rwanda, population wise. Actually, I think they're the same, but the government puts a lot of money. Their diaspora puts a lot of money behind it, but they're well organized. They're well structured. In Africa, we're still not. We still not working well together yet. And there's this. This problem here to come together and to have a focused vision to really change this game. Because, and I'm going to end with this, we still we still producing almost nothing and consuming everything. It's just crazy, man. But in 2020, that's just the reality. If you look at the tech world in Africa, big majority is not African entrepreneur, but they're
Yeah.
doing business in Africa.
Yeah. Great. So you're an entrepreneur, you're a founder, you have employees, um, you have a family as well. So what helps you to be more effective on a daily basis? Like what is your routine or something that contributes to your effectiveness and success?
Well, I reached a level. I always say there's four levels to motivation, to motivating yourself. There's unmotivated, motivated, self-motivated, and motivator. That's the one that motivate themselves and others. And I think now with all the failure and success I've had in my life, I got to that level where it's second nature. I don't. I mean, I have bad days just like everybody else. Don't get me wrong. COVID is just one example. I mean, there's plenty others, but I got bad days. But as long as you don't lose focus on where you're going, and
Yeah.
as long every time you get depressed, every time you want to quit, every time you want to give up, and every time you doubting yourself, because that's also the killer of dreams is self-doubt. Every time you get to that level, you always got to visualize where you're going. You always got to say, you always got to train your mind to focus on where you're going. And that's what I do. Every time I get to those negative thoughts, I always focus where I'm trying to go, and where I'm going. And that helps me perspective, because I'm not just doing that. I'm 43, man. I'm not, I've passed that age of trying to chase money and all. Now to me, it's about purpose, man. I live a purpose driven life. It's about legacy. It's about inspiring my kids. And it's about doing something. My biggest, I'm hoping what I'm trying to do is inspire the next generation. I cannot inspire them if I quit on my own dreams. I mean, what message am I giving them? So that's what motivates me every day.
Perfect. Yeah. So speaking of inspiring the next generation, you wrote a book, My African Dream,
Yep.
right? Can you talk a little bit about it and what inspired you to write that?
Yeah, I mean, this book came actually the initially I was going to write a book called Self Made. I was going to talk about how I started from nothing, and I failed so many times, and I built a business, and then the first successful business was a logistical business in the States and all. But then when I came back home, I started talking to those kids and mentor those kids and all. And I started meeting kids that, still dream about going to America, going to Europe, telling you about Africa is not the place to be and all. And I was like, wow, we and I remember that used to be my generation dream. Our dream was to get out of here. Our dream was not to be in Africa. Our dream was to finish high school and get out of here. There's none of my friends from my generation that stayed in Africa. And you know how crazy it used to be? We used to compete who's going to leave first. And when you were still behind, we used to make fun of you. Oh, look at you, man. You're still here. Oh, my God. So this, this was our mindset. So I was, but when after 17 years of America, I have nothing against the States, but after 17 years of being in America as an African, because I like to call myself an African, not just a runner, but an African. As an African, I realized that, America, first of all, was not what I thought it was on TV. It was the media did not portray the challenges and the life that America is. Actually, America to me was the hardest country I ever lived in, by
Yeah.
far, the hardest one. It's one of those countries that don't forgive. You can be on the street tomorrow if you don't pay your rent. In Africa, you can always negotiate with your landlord. You can
Yeah.
always talk to your landlord, right? You can always. So I realized I needed to show the real story, not just the bad, because I learned a lot from the States, but also the challenges I faced. I faced a lot of challenges. I was homeless at some point in my life over there. I spent 36 hours in jail for some dumb stuff. So I said, you know what? Let me show the America I know but also show what I learned and show why I came back. Why I finally realized that, there's no better place than home for me. I can only speak for myself. But I wanted to show, and that's why I called it the African Dream, because I wanted to inspire these young kids and say, hey, yes, we have an American dream. That's their dream. But we also have an African dream. We need to build our own dream, man. We can't just keep living, and hoping things will get better. That's just not a strategy anymore, and that's what the book is all about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so for the viewers, please, I will link to the to Henry's book on Amazon. You can grab a copy. It's only $5, I believe. Let's support our brother and also learn from his
Appreciate it.
story. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Speaking of supporting our African brothers and sisters, like, what would you tell Africans who think that Africa's problems is for Africans, it's for someone else to solve, right? And also talk about how we can support each other moving forward, because we can talk about all these problems, all these challenges that exist, but like if we're not the ones coming up with solutions, nobody's going to come and save us, right? So in one of your videos, you talk about supporting each other, um, supporting each other's businesses and stuff. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that element of support, and how
Yeah,
Africans support each other to be able to succeed?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll spend time on just two things. On the user side, on the customer side, we need to start buying African. We need to spend our hard-earned money, um, with African businesses, African products. We still, and not to change subject, but we have African, us, all of us. We have this complex. We have this inferiority complex, thinking that others, the West, are better than us, and then that's why we buy everything from the States or from the luxury brand. We need to start consuming African, not 100%, but supporting. Number one, we need to start partnering and doing business together among African. There's the percentage of partnership among African companies, especially for SMEs, small and medium size, is below 5%. It's just crazy. So we don't do a lot of business together, among Africans. And lastly, we need to network. We need to organize ourselves, whether it's fundraising, whether it's networking, especially between diaspora still outside and diaspora and African that are on the continent, and become this bridge. If we don't work together, we're just not going to make it. We are already behind everybody else. Africa is the last continent to be developed. Everybody else is on another level. So we are already behind. And if we don't wake up, man, this dream is not going to be our dream. It's going to be somebody else's dream. I mean, we all know Chinese, Asia is already investing here. There's a lot of foreign companies already doing business here. We just need to wake up, man. I mean, it's just a reality on the ground.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah. So, and lastly, let's talk about networking and also how people can find you and how they can reach you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm on all social media. I post vlogs every 2 days on Twitter. It's all under my name: Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channel. I have where I post videos also. But yeah, you can hit me up. My favorite platform is LinkedIn by far.
Yeah, that's where we connected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I'm on LinkedIn more than any other platform because that's really where the professionals are. But
Yeah.
you can hit me up on all those
Yeah.
platforms for sure.
Yeah, I'll definitely link to all your social media platforms. I highly recommend that people check out Henry's YouTube. He has a lot of information there especially for entrepreneurs who want to do business on the African continent. He has a bunch of ideas and advice, and also his Instagram. He shares a lot of video clips, kind of sharing his journey and giving advice. So definitely check it out for inspiration and kind of learn from him. Henry, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I really appreciate it. I'm sure that we'll stay in touch, and good luck with your ventures and everything that you're doing on the African continent.
Man, thank you for the invite, man. And you too, man. Good luck, man. And we'll definitely keep in touch for sure.
All right, thank you.
All right, man.